historic meeting that could open a new chapter on the Korean Peninsula. That's how many in the world's media have been describing the summit between the leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Kim Jung Un, and US President Donald Trump. They shook hands and held a one-on-one meeting at the Capella Hotel on Singapore's resort island of Sentosa before proceeding to an expanded meeting and a working lunch with aides on each side. Kim and Trump also signed a joint statement in which President Trump committed to providing security guarantees to the DPRK, and Kim Jung Un reaffirmed his firm and unwavering commitment to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But the document is an outline with no specifics or deadlines, leaving analysts divided on its significance. At a press conference after the meeting, President Trump described the meeting as honest, direct, and productive. Adversaries can indeed become friends, he claimed. There is no limit to what the DPRK can achieve when it gives up nuclear weapons and embraces commerce. So how well did the two click together, and how much can that personal rapport propel things forward? Welcome to the special edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. And before introducing my guests, I'd like to start with my own takeaway from today's meeting. Now, at the press conference after the meeting, President Trump was asked a question, whether or not he would consider Kim Jung Un as an equal. This question was in the same line as comments echoed throughout the day by Western observers, whether President Trump has legitimized the DPRK regime by putting the two national flags next to each other, by standing shoulder to shoulder with the leader of a so-called despotic government. President Trump's answer at the press conference was pragmatic. He said if he could, by sitting next to Kim Jong Un, make the world a safer place, save millions of people's lives, he would do it. He dodged the question whether or not he would consider Kim as an equal, as that would have given Kim probably another verbal endorsement. I hail President Trump's pragmatism, but I do think it is high time that the Western observers change their perspective towards the leader of the DPRK. This is a sovereign country, and Kim Jong Un is the legitimate leader of that sovereign country. He deserves to be treated the same way as he would be just like any other leaders in the world. Of course, the country has this or that problem. Human rights issues definitely among them, but who doesn't? The US itself has human rights problems such as gun violence, police brutality, racism and sexism, and nobody asks whether they would give the US leader legitimacy by standing next to him. In the compound of the United Nations everywhere in the world, the North Korean flag flies high next to all the other flags of the 192 other UN member states. It has been that way since the DPRK joined the UN in 1991. It's not legitimizing that country. That's the way it should be. So I must give credit to President Trump on this. He treated Kim Jong Un like another equal human being with respect and fairness for what he and his country has done to get this far. If he continues to treat Kim and the DPRK in this light, there is real hope that the good personal chemistry that has been found today will bring about some positive changes on the ground. So now, let's start our discussion, and I'm very pleased to be joined in Beijing, in the Beijing studio, by Zhao Hai from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In London, we have Tat Yan Kong, Associate Professor from SOAS at the University of London. And we have in Singapore, Victor Tail, Assistant Professor from the University of Hong Kong. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show. Victor, let me come to you first. Now, as we have seen throughout the day, many handshakes, I mean countless, I can't remember how many, and numerous touching by these two on the arms, a pat on the back, and then long-time handshakes, as some people have noted, over 10 seconds long, exchange of smiles, a walk in the garden next to each other, a random chat here and there. Did their rapport strike you in any way between the two leaders?
Well, I think certainly the two leaders have hit it off. When they started in the morning, I think both leaders were quite serious. But by lunchtime, they were telling jokes. And by the signing of the agreement, both leaders looked really comfortable and acquainted. President Trump himself has said that he has built a a really good relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jung Un, and they are looking forward to many more meetings afterwards. So I think certainly there's a fair amount of rapport that is going on between the two leaders. I suspect it's because both leaders are quite alike. They are both feisty. They are very strong-willed. So, I'm not surprised that both leaders hit it off.
Let me go to Tat Yan Kong in London. I didn't spot any awkward moments as people might expect, right, between the two leaders who were exchanging very fiery comments, one calling another a dotard and the other calling back little rocket man. But it seems that there were little suspicion between the two, almost no hostility. Did they click on the spot, or were they really eager to make the success from the beginning?
Well, I think that there's been a lot of work done in the background between the officials of both sides. So going into the summit, much of the substance had already been thrashed out, and even before the recriminations of last year, President Trump had actually expressed some admiration for Kim Jong Un. He talks about Kim Jong Un rising to the top in his 20s, in his late 20s, in a very, very tough political environment. So I think to a certain extent, actually, President Trump identifies with Kim Jong Un, actually sees Kim Jong Un in some ways as a kind of younger version of himself in the 1970s, when he became a successful business tycoon.
Well, that sounds quite outrageous, right, Mr. Zhao Hai here in Beijing. How would you describe the kind of relationship, and doesn't President Trump carry a lot of risk by appearing to identify with this, this leader from a despotic, depraved government?
I think coming into this meeting, President Trump has more upside than downside, making good relations with Chairman Kim. And he has expressed his willingness to shake hands with him and even have a burger with him. So looking at the menus today, it really incorporates both Western, and even some Chinese ingredients in it. Mm-hmm. So I think both sides are trying to make things happen and trying to trust each other and make good relations to lay the groundwork for future cooperations and discussion of details. So I think it's very important for both leaders to show the media, the entire world, that they can cooperate with each other, that they are able to have good relations with each other.
Victor, the two men, accompanied by only interpreters, spoke for a little under 40 minutes. They were then joined by small delegations of advisors on each side. What do you think of this tactic, allowing the two to build up or to see whether they click before allowing others in? Any lessons for other world leaders, and any potential risks there?
Well, I think this is a particularly good system, because in the first 40 or 45 minutes, both leaders actually met on a one-to-one basis just with the translators, and it provided the opportunity for both leaders to size each other up, to engage really frankly in what their concerns are and what they hope to accomplish. I am not privy to what went on in that 45 minutes of conversation, but I can tell for a fact that this was an opportunity that for both leaders to express their views in earnest, and I think it got them, it established a very personal relationship. The leaders managed to use this time to establish a very personal relationship, and judging from what I've seen in the past few months, President Trump actually likes to have this kind of rapport with whoever that he's dealing with. He's done that with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He's done that with, to a lesser extent, I think, with President Moon of South Korea, and he's actually
also with Chinese
spent time with
Xi
President Xi Jinping.
Right, absolutely.
That's right.
So maybe that is his unique
style. So I think it helped.
Mm-hmm. Right. Let me come to the more awkward topic of human rights. However, if you watch the Western media, that topic is always there, and a lot of people are urging President Trump to bring that up during his meeting with Kim Jung Un. But however, what we have seen is that President Trump has been low-key, especially when he was asked by journalists whether he brought it up. He was quiet, didn't make any specific comments. So, Professor Tat Yan Kong, how do you look at his attitude towards such issues? Is he really being pragmatic, believing that, you know, human rights should not come number one, or is he really doing that for the sake of keeping the atmosphere of the first meeting with Kim Jong Un good, and potentially bringing such topics later?
Well, President Trump is he's not a liberal idealist. He doesn't believe in regime change like his predecessors. He doesn't believe in imposing liberal democracy on other countries. And also on the issue of human rights, you know, it's a matter of priorities. The most important priority for the people in the region, the most important right is actually to be free from the threat of war, and for the North Koreans is actually livelihood issues to develop their economy. So you might say human rights, anti-corruption, these types of governance issues, these issues tend to make progress, you know, when there actually has been some economic development, and you cannot have economic development unless you have peace first. So I think President Trump has actually got it quite right in actually dodging these human rights issues.
Let's take a look at what came out of the meeting today. It's a 4-point joint statement, and I'm going to read it, go through it real fast, so that for those of you who haven't been following this around the clock, here it is. The first point: the two sides commit to establish new relations in accordance with the desire of the peoples of the two countries for peace and prosperity. The second point: the two sides will join their efforts to build a lasting and stable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. Number 3, reaffirming the April 27, 2018 Pyongyang Declaration, the DPRK commits to work towards complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And lastly, the two sides commit to recovering POW MIA remains, including the immediate repatriation of those already identified. So, Mr. Zhao, let me come to you here. Well, the two sides have just decided to commit to establish new relations, but there is no details and there is no description as to what kind of new relations they want to talk about. Is it a better relationship or diplomatic relationship with ambassadors on each side? So it seems quite empty. Is there anything that can be read between the lines for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and also it's interesting not what's been written down in that joint statement, but what's been left out. As you mentioned, they committed to a new relationship, but how to interpret the new? Normalization of relations, of course, is the target for North Korea. They have been pursuing this for a very long time. But here, the United States didn't say that they were going to establish normal diplomatic relations. After that, in the news conference, of course, President Trump mentioned that it's possible to exchange ambassadors between the two countries. And also, in the process of negotiation, China used to offer the Chinese solution, which is to establish liaison offices between the two capitals. So I think going forward, they will have to find out a way to explain exactly what kind of new type of relations is going to be there, and how to realize that either through diplomatic or through other ways, for instance, economic relationship.
Yeah, Professor Tat Yan Kong, how do you read the word new here? What does it mean? Is there some kind of precondition as to what kind of normal relations, when they can have the normal relations? Does the warring state has to be finished before they can exchange ambassadors and set up diplomatic relations?
Well, I think the first step might be, you know, not establishing full diplomatic relations, but actually establishing consular offices in both countries. So one step short of establishing full diplomatic relations. Maybe the United States can allow some kind of cultural and educational contacts within the limits of the sanctions. Also, maybe this is something to be worked out at the next step, when they announce a date for a next summit.
Victor, in Singapore, the second point of this joint statement talks about establishing a lasting peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. Where do you think is the starting point in doing that?
Well, I think the starting point is it will be, this ball is going to be in North Korea's court. I think one of the first things that they have to do is to give some support to President Trump's political platform, meaning when Chairman Kim gets home, he actually has to take some actions to reassure the American public and the world that North Korea is actually serious about the denuclearization agenda. And just now at the press conference, President Trump has actually said that when one of the things that the chairman, when he gets back to North Korea, is to order the destruction of a missile engine testing facility. This is something that he said the North Korean leader offered as part of the denuclearization program. He also said that next week his national security team, that is the Secretary of State Pompeo, National Security Advisor Bolton, and the rest of the specialists and experts on the American side will meet and discuss how North Korean denuclearization efforts can be independently verified. So they're going to take steps towards this. So it remains to be seen the kind of details that will be worked out between President Trump's team and Chairman Kim's team. So we will expect definitely for some sort of, for a more detailed plan to be put forth once, in the next few weeks.
Right. However, so far we haven't seen anything the United States has to do vis-a-vis what the DPRK has to do. So basically the DPRK has already destroyed the entrance to the tunnels to the nuclear testing site. That is one step. And then they have also released some hostages, right? And now it seems that they are also going to take additional steps. So what does the United States have promised to do in exchange for some kind of reciprocal progress along this line? Zhao Hai, maybe?
Well, first of all, President Trump has been talking about, for instance, number one, stop the war games, which means, of course, people are trying to find out exactly what he means by that. But I would assume that with the more action taken by North Korean side, the United States will at least draw down the number of troops participating in the joint exercise with South Korea, or maybe reducing the offensive exercise during the joint exercise. And also, the next step they can take is to reduce the number of troops that they have been discussing stationed in South Korea.
But all of this has never been stated, has not been stated in the joint statement, right? We're only talking about what has been written down. There is nothing written down about what the United States has to do in order to get in exchange for complete denuclearization of the DPRK. Zhao Hai?
Yes, that's right. Because also exactly how to denuclearize is also not written down in that joint statement. So I think the two teams, our working teams, are still working out hash out the details of the mutual tit-for-tat sort of progress in the future. And right now, apparently, they're not settled on that front yet. Okay,
we're going to take a very short break. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin, a special edition on a summit between President Kim and between President Trump and Kim Jung Un. We'll be back right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let me go to my guest in London, Tat Yan Kong. We see this mention of the DPRK committing to complete denuclearization. However, the word irreversible and verifiable, all of these words that people have been asking for are not there. But however, it is also how it was written in the Pyongyang Declaration at the end of April between the leaders of the North and South, where they confirmed the common goal of a nuclear-free Korean peninsula through complete denuclearization. According to your understanding, why is only the word complete in there, not the other adjectives?
Well, complete denuclearization actually implies verifiability. It also implies irreversibility. I think complete denuclearization means not only North Korea, but it also means the alleviation of nuclear threats against North Korea. So, for example, the flights by nuclear bombers from Guam, for example, during the annual war games. So even though they don't mention complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, I think it is implicit, and the next step really is to get inspectors into North Korea. So I think once we have inspectors in North Korea, that would actually show that this is a serious process.
Okay. Final point, maybe Victor in Singapore. In this joint statement, it is written that only the DPRK commits to work towards denuclearization. There is no mention of a nuclear-free peninsula or the South having to do anything. Well, maybe the United States doesn't see it as necessary mentioning the South in a kind of a joint statement between the United States and DPRK. How do you look at this?
Well, I think one of the key U.S. interests is to prevent the drawdown of troops in South Korea. I think the South Koreans knows this, the North Koreans knows this. The Secretary of Defense of the U.S. actually has gone on record, I think yesterday, late yesterday or early this morning, it was reported that he said that the troop levels are not on the table for negotiation, and even if the troop level is on the table for negotiation, it will be down to the South Koreans. So I think for a fact that all parties have actually kind of, I would feel implicitly accepted that the American forces are there to stay. Donald Trump, during his press conference, he did talk about this. He said he campaigned on the fact that he wanted all the American soldiers overseas home. But for the moment, at this juncture, this is also not on the table. So I think pretty much there might be some symbolic drawdown on the American troops on the southern side, but I think American nuclear capabilities in East Asia are here to stay.
Okay, let's take a listen to what President Trump said during the press conference after the summit about how he feels whether President Kim is going to honor this agreement. Let's take a listen.
I think he might want to do this as much or even more than me, because they see a very bright future for North Korea. So you never know, right? We never know. But I'll tell you what, we signed a very comprehensive document today, and I think most of you have been given that document. But we signed a very, very comprehensive document, and I believe he's going to live up to that document.
So, Mr. Zhao Hai here in the studio, it seems that President Trump has a lot of confidence in President Trump, in Mr. Trump honoring this agreement and really wanting it to happen. Do you think he really has that confidence, or he's really trying to convince himself that this is the way this is going to happen?
I think the latter is true. He said he can know whether or not the other side will commit to the joint agreement by the first look. Basically, the first minute, he will catch the moment and see whether or not this guy will honor this agreement. So I think what he has done is that after meeting with Kim Jung Un, he decided that Kim is trustworthy and he can continue to work with him.
Professor Tat Yan Kong, let's take a look at the response, the reaction from South Korean leader Moon Jae-in. He praised the two leaders, President Trump and Kim Jung Un, for their courage and their bold decisions. Do you think what do you think of what was reached today? Do you think it is satisfactory from the perspective of the ROK?
I think it is very satisfactory, because the 4-point statements actually reaffirmed its support for the Pyongyang Declaration. The most important thing for the ROK is actually to put an end to the danger of war. So I think from the ROK's perspective, it's actually been a very good day.
Let's take a look at the role of China. China is not present there. Chinese voices very little so far. We've only heard Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi making comments about it, plus the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Let's take a listen to what Foreign Minister and State Councillor Wang Yi said at noon today.
To resolve the nuclear issue, of course we must realise that denuclearization, and it must be a comprehensive denuclearization. At the same time, we need to establish a security mechanism on the peninsula so as to resolve the security concerns of the DPRK. I don't think anybody should doubt the unique and important role China plays in this process, and we will continue to play such a role.
Well, some would say, Mr. Zhao Hai, that if this is what China has been working on, this kind of, dual suspension progress that we are seeing now, what has changed that it is happening now finally?
Well, first of all, I think China has contributed a lot to this outcome in Singapore, and China has been the contributor to the continuing progress on the Korean Peninsula. And also, looking at this joint statement, you can't stop by thinking that this is actually China's work, because it follows the two-track solution that China proposed from the very beginning. That is, on the one hand, you have North Korea committed to denuclearization. On the other hand, you have the United States committed to the peace process and final recognition of North Korea. So I think at the end of the day, the voice saying that China is somehow marginalized or is not at the seat in Singapore is really not accurate understanding of China's role in this whole process.
Victor, let me ask you about this. During his press conference, President Trump also said China is a great country with a great leader. He may be calling President Xi even before he lands back in the United States. He said he will involve the ROK in Japan, but to a lesser extent China. But he also mentioned something quite interesting, that the U.S. economy is twice the size of China. I don't know why he said that. But anyway, why do you think he is mentioning this lesser role that China can possibly play?
Well, I think the signals are kind of mixed. First of all, everybody, including Donald Trump himself, knows how vital China is in the whole process. I mean, the Chinese are the ones that helped the Americans with the sanctions. 90% of the DPRK's trade is with China, and without the Chinese enforcement of the sanctions on North Korea wouldn't have come to the table in the first place. Everyone knows this. And the very fact that President Xi has actually spoken to Chairman Kim at least twice suggests that the Chinese views are taken very seriously by the North Koreans. And to that extent, even the North Koreans delegation came on an Air China airplane. So China's role on as well. Is yeah, so China's role is instrumental. Everybody knows this. But at the same time, Donald Trump is facing serious domestic opposition at home. So sometimes I can't really tell whether he actually means what he says, or he's just playing to the crowds, because he's been saying for ages he wants to build a wall across to Mexico. We don't see movement on the wall. He's been saying things about the DPRK, and then he does a 180-degree flip. So in that respect, I think Donald Trump also thanked Chinese President Xi during the press conference.
Right.
But I think one of the things that the North Koreans really want out of the meeting is for the North Koreans to establish some sort of bilateral relations with independent bilateral relations with the Americans, not through the South Koreans and not through the Chinese.
Let me ask...
so this is, I think, what he wants.
Yeah, let me ask Mr. Zhao Hai a last question real quick. Is a unified Korea not in China's interest?
Well, not necessarily. It depends on how to accomplish the unification, and after unification, what foreign policy would this unified North Korea, the whole Korea, uphold. Okay, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to my guests, Professor Tat Yan Kong, Associate Professor from SOAS at the University of London. Here in the studio, from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Zhao Hai, and from Singapore, Victor Thiel, Assistant Professor from the University of Hong Kong. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.